Welcome to part one of the Unconditional Parenting screencast. So we discussed a quote from Alfie Kahn's book, Unconditional Parenting, a few weeks ago, and I'd like to return back to this book. This book is revolutionary. It was a real game changer for me when it came to understanding caregiving, because so many of the principles in unconditional parenting really apply to teaching. And as I read this book, long before I was a parent, I really thought about what it meant to be a teacher, and has had the beautiful side effect of me considering it as a parent as well. So let's dive in here to part one of unconditional parenting. So the first tenet that Alfie Kahn asks us to think about is being reflective. And reflective requires us to really be critical of ourselves and to ask ourselves, like, are we doing the right thing? Did we do our best? Should we do that differently? Could we do that differently? If I got a do-over, what would be different? And that's really reviewing what we did today so you can be better tomorrow. Some things I did today were great. Some things I did could have been better. What would I do different next time? Avoid rationalizing. There are plenty of good reasons why we do what we do. There are plenty of not so good reasons why we do what we do. In the end, the rationalization doesn't matter. It's the practice of reflecting on ourselves to continue to be better than our rationale that's really important here. Additionally, we want to examine our motives. Is our motive just because we want to make our lives easier, because we want compliance with the children, or is it really because we want what's in their long-term best interest? And then be honest with yourself. Because if you're not honest with yourself, people will see that, and particularly children, because they see us for who we really are, they may question if we are honest with them. The second principle is reconsider your requests. So the problem that we are trying to solve when we make requests of children, they might be the problem with our expectation, not with the children. And we have to also consider the how, but we also need to remember the why. When we are making a request, why are we making a request? For whose benefit? To what outcome? And then we want to examine the value of that request and who the value is to. Again, if it's to make our lives easier, why are we asking for compliance from the children? And then, if it is reasonable, you should always be able to explain why. If you can't explain why your request is reasonable, then you may want to reconsider that particular request. Our third one is to keep your eye on the long-term goals. And I put in parentheses here, democratic life skills. If that's our long-term goal with young children, is to help them be democratic members of our society, then we have to keep an eye on that long-term goal. And oftentimes we are focused on the short term and the day-to-day, and we lose sight of that long-term goal. So we really want to ask ourselves, is my method going to achieve the long-term goals that I really want? Do I want children to be independent and thoughtful and creative and helpful and kind and respectful, and also maybe sometimes challenging of authority? If I do, then I want to think about in every moment how I act and react now that will support those long-term goals. I want to be careful not to get trapped in the minutia of everyday life. That it's really easy to micromanage the little things going on each and every day. But instead, we want to focus on that third point, what really matters here? And usually it's the long run that matters more than the short run. Relationship first. I'd say relationship first and foremost. So being right isn't always the most important thing. I would argue the most important thing is preserving the integrity of the relationship. Mistaken behavior is easier to address when there is trust. And trust comes from relationship. So we've got to put relationship first, build that trust, and then we can really help address that behavior. Because the question we really have to ask here is an intervention, is intervening with children worth the potential long-term damage done to the relationship? Now, sometimes there's a short, short-term damage, I guess. There's an immediate tear in the relationship, but that's an opportunity for rebuilding. But if we're overly managing children, if we are constantly looking at the minutia and focusing on that, then the relationship can become damaged and children may not trust us long term. You want to think about change how you see the world, not just how you respond to the world. So when we see mistaken behavior, if we can switch it to, as opposed to seeing it as an infraction or a difficulty, instead we say, this is an opportunity to solve a problem. That reframe changes how we see the world and how we respond. We always want to think about from a child's perspective. From a child's perspective, were they intending harm? From a child's perspective, were they fearful? Were they feeling endangered even if they weren't? That can really make a difference in how we see what's going on for children. And when we have a strengths-based view of humanity, the child and children, we are more likely to respond with support and kindness. I want to quickly say here, I do not mean be a pushover and be wishy-washy. I absolutely do not mean that. I am often very straightforward with children. I've actually had colleagues criticize me and critique me for that. They say, you're so straightforward with them. Like, you need to be sweeter and kinder and gentler. So I'm not saying here be a super softie, but when we believe that children are resilient and strong and capable, we have this strength-based view, then we will then believe that they had good motives, even if the outcome was less than ideal. Little Aretha tribute here, a little bit of respect, RESPECT. And it's really important that we not just love children. We don't just think they're cute, but that we respect them. We respect them for being capable and competent in so much of what they do. We also expect that they are the experts on themselves. We often say that parents are experts on their children, but I don't think that's true. I think children are the experts on themselves. You ever had somebody try to tell you who you are and it doesn't jive with who you know you are? It feels really disrespectful. But if someone first asks you about yourself and then says, "Oh, yay, I see that in you. Yeah, I can really get behind that." That feels really validating. So we need to do the same for children. Likewise, we need to respect them by avoiding teasing, belittling, dismissing them, and being sarcastic. I think sarcastic is one of the biggest pitfalls we fall into. And sarcasm is dangerous for a couple of reasons. One, young children do not have abstract ability, and sarcasm requires a deep amount of abstract understanding. And two, once they realize what sarcasm is, they realize that there's been a joke played on them that they never really understood. Also, sometimes we try to tease children and we think it's loving. Really, it can be very hurtful. I'm not saying don't be silly and humorous with children, but we never should do it at an expense to their self-esteem or their developing self-identity. That concludes part one of this unconditional parenting and teaching screencast. You're now ready to move on to part two.